Yeah. Well, hello everyone, and welcome. First of all, can I remind you all to switch off your mobiles, please? Yeah? Everyone's got them switched off? Well, welcome to Convict or Conscript, in conversation with Humbert Hernandez. I know Humbert as a man of the theatre and a teacher. Both of us belong to the same drama group, Group 2000, and we've worked together on many productions over the years. A man of intellect, of strong convictions and principles. I was just a child when, together with Alfred Cortés and others, he fought for what he genuinely believed in and took on the establishment at a time when it wasn't easy, really, to take on the establishment. But I grew up knowing about his incarceration and the enormous impact that it had on the community locally. And the stories of his friends we share in the theatre, they would proudly, very often, talk about him singing to him every night outside the Moorish castle. And Humbert will tell us a little bit more about that later. Well, Humbert is a great actor. He's also a great director. He knows his Shakespeare. He is well read in both English and Spanish. And he also knows his opera inside out. I think that's fair to say. I don't believe he has ever been afraid to take on any part in the theatre. And if you don't know, next week he's actually performing in a play, which is on at the Insus Hall, which is about the evacuation, and it's called Llévame donde nací. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that and your role in that a little later. Now, his list of stage performances is long, but I guess and I have to tell you this because I remember him most fondly in a play called Mujeres, which was produced by Cecil Gomez, in which he delivered most convincingly through song every single night. And he had everyone believe that he was actually singing, when actually he was miming to Plácido Domingo every single night. And I think to this day, everyone still thinks that it was Humbert. One thing is certain, he has a very powerful delivery, as we will hear a little later on. Now, when we met just a week ago, we decided that rather than keep to the story in Conscript or Convict, the facts are all in the book. So we're going to kind of go around the book a little bit and talk about other things as well, because he has great passion for his writing, and he wants to talk about his writing as well. Of course, there will be questions as well that you can ask later. Now, Humbert has also written two other books, and those of you who don't know, it's the short stories, El Acordonista, and the other book is a poetry book called Paisaje Interior. Both of them are in Spanish, and there's more to come from what I hear. But first, let's move on to his first book. It was the 1970s. It was a time of change. The frontier with Spain had just closed. It was a time of industrial upheaval and social unrest. Gibraltar was changing, but so was the world around us. Traditional values were being questioned, old institutions forced, though slowly, to change their ways. And the focus was on human rights, and this is where we begin our story. A story which would lead to the abolition of compulsory military service on the Rock, and the main players, Alfred Cortés and Humbert Hernandez, but as Humbert will tell us, there were many others who also joined in the struggle. So where to begin? Well, I thought we would begin 45 years later, because it took him 45 years to actually write this book. So, why did it take you so long, and why 45 years after?
Well, when I went into prison, one of the things I did, because one of my good friends recommended it, Elio Cruz, he said, keep notes because you will forget many things that happen in there. And I did. But I kept those notes not because I wanted to write a book myself. I never thought of myself as a writer, really, and less still writing social history. I don't think I've got the right skills or discipline or whatever is needed. And so what I did was wait all these years to see if a local historian would take up the challenge and write about it. But that has not happened. And I am just on the threshold of turning 70. I can really say that 3/4 of my life, if not more, has gone. So we all know life is a bitch. One is here today and gone tomorrow. So it came to the crunch that I thought, since I had already published 2 books, I said, if I don't get down and do it myself, nobody will. And it would be a shame if somebody did try to tackle this once I and Alfred Cortes had gone, because the primary sources wouldn't be here, so to speak. So that is really the reason why I took 45 years to get round to it.
So let's go back 45 years. How can you actually recall the day that you walked into the prison, and what was that sudden realization that you were there? You were inside and there was no way out, there was no turning back.
Yes, I know. I mean, all the business that led up to it, going for the hearing at the magistrate's court, which was an ordeal in itself. I had never been to a court in my life, and less still had I been in the dock, charged with anything. So it was, for me, it was an awesome experience being in there. But once the proceedings started going, it was pie in the sky. I was riding high in the sky sort of thing. And when I got into prison, nothing hit me until I was put in the isolation cell, and the metal door clanged behind me, and then there was this deafening silence. And then there was nothing else to do. I mean, I was there for a week in that cell, 3 meters by 2 meters, and there was only a bed, a chair, a little chest of drawers, and a potty. And that was all. So if you can imagine being put in a place for a week, 24 hours, with nothing to do, because I wasn't allowed to have a book, a magazine, a newspaper, or pen and paper to write. I didn't have anything to do. I mean, you reach the point where you're almost climbing the walls, kind of thing. And I know you asked me last week, you said, perhaps one of the shortcomings of this book is that you describe very well what happened in prison and the conditions and all that. But what you haven't done is detail what went on in your mind, right? And I accept that criticism. I accept it, and I've thought about it in this last week. And really, I can only come up with the fact that that week must have been so bloody awful that my memory has just wiped it out. I can guess more or less what my thoughts were. I must have been thinking a great deal about my parents, who at that time must have been going through hell, because it was the run-up to Christmas, and there was no Christmas in my house that year. I know that. I must have been thinking about them and about 2 plays that I left in the lurch. one with my group, and the other one with the youth theatre which I had started, and it was a Christmas play to be performed at Sacred Heart Church. They both went on in the end, thank God. And I must have been thinking a great deal about myself, I suppose, where I was going, what I had done, how it would all end. I think the realization hit me that things might not be that easy after that, professionally. I mean, I didn't know whether I would be sacked. In fact, I thought I would be. So I think my thoughts would have run round along those lines, but I really can't remember.
We'll go back
Not
to that.
that week, anyway.
We'll go back to that in a little while, but where does the campaign begin? How does it all begin? You meet with Alfred, and you both independently start this campaign.
Well, let's take it back a bit further. I did my national service in 1964. I had been awarded a scholarship for teacher training, right? I was 18 at the time, and I received my call-up papers. And all hell was let loose at home. I ranted and raved, as I had described there, and I cried, and my father just let me get on, and then he said, well, sit down and let's talk about it. The first casualty is going to be a scholarship, right? You can't challenge the establishment and expect them to give you a scholarship. And I was cornered, and he said, you're 18, and the majority age is 21, so I'm still responsible for you. Do you expect me to go to court? So in that sense, I simply had to grin and bear it. I did my 4 months.
And what were those 4 months like for you?
For me, a total waste of time as far as I'm concerned. I wasn't interested in what they were doing up there. I mean, I accept the fact that some people like that. I don't, And I was forced to do it. In peacetime, when there was no outside aggressor or anything like that. I mean, I explained this in an interview. We were living through the 1960s and 70s under an impending nuclear holocaust at the touch of a button between Russia and the West. So what use were a few soldiers running around the rock with rifles going to do in such a scenario? It's just a total waste of time. So I got through my 4 months, right? And then I went off to study, came back 3 years later. The last thing on my mind was that I would be called up to do a 15-day camp. And the year after I returned, in 1968, I got called up for 2 weeks. I was caught again because I had signed a contract with the government, a 3-year contract, right? So I went and did the 2 weeks. And I vowed I would never do it again. The thing came up again in 1970, and that's it. I said, that's it. I was 24, my own master, and that was it. And then I went, during the half days in June, I remember I went to Camp Bay on my own. And I met Alfred Cortes, who I knew since from my school days. We'd been together in school. And we chatted about this and that, and he said, I've been called up to the 15-day camp and I'm not doing it. I said, well, I'm doing the same thing, So that was it. July came, school finished, I went off on holiday, and when I came back, that's when it all started. We said, when we come back, we'll get down to forming a group and planning a campaign, and that is what we did.
It was an intense and active campaign.
It was a very intense campaign, short, sharp and intense, yes. Very.
And it was extensively covered in all the media. Locally.
In all the media, yeah.
Pro?
For and against.
For and against.
Oh, yes. In the Gibraltar Chronicle, the Gibraltar Evening Post, El Calpense, they all covered it, yes, and GBC.
It said a lot for democracy at that time, because there were many people who were opposed to what you were doing, and I know my father was one of them, and he wrote about it. We weren't going to talk about that, but we decided that we were going to talk about it in the end.
Well, we can't sidestep the issue, really.
But I'm going to let him read a little bit from there. Something that he actually wrote in the focus column in the Gibraltar Evening Post. But one can almost understand that, because his generation went through the war years. They actually fought in the war, so it was totally different for them. But yet they were all open to you putting your points of view across.
Yes, I can rationalize that now that I'm 70 and I look back. I couldn't then when I was 24, but when I read the column that your father wrote in the Gibraltar Evening Post, he came out very, very strong when we decided to give out leaflets to those who were going up to do a 2-week camp, right? We had already done our bunk, but different groups got called up every now and then. And we went out and gave the leaflets, and I remember that first focus column that your father wrote. He was very, very irate, extremely irate. And I can understand it now. I mean, he was one of the original volunteers of the GDF in 1939. He belonged to a different generation to me. And there we are. That's the way we clashed that way. I remember he said in his column that he was sick and disgusted because we had given these leaflets out, implying that we were terribly unpatriotic,
But yet he respected what you were doing, and I'm going to let you read that bit there, which is from the Focus column, because there were a lot of other men in that situation, who you had later interviewed as well, and who were in your favor as well, eventually.
Oh, yeah. On the 8th of December, Manolo Mascarenhas devoted his entire column of focus in the Gibraltar Evening Post to questioning the reasons why Alfred Cortes and I had refused to comply with the law on conscription. Here is a short taster of his article. But I must respect Humbert Hernandez for sticking to his guns and attempting to make an issue of something he apparently believes in. What really concerns me, however, is if Alfred Cortes and Humbert Hernandez and other youngsters are mistaken or misled. I would once and for all like to know what they are fighting for. I have read the statements given in court by Alfred Cortes and Humbert Hernandez. I may be thick, but I still haven't got the message. Humbert Hernandez must come out of jail and immediately explain why he decided to go there. But I think I explained all that before I went there. Really, honestly, I think I did.
The morning that you went to court,
Yeah.
Humbert was a teacher, you were in school, and, well, I'll let him read it because it's quite interesting, really, the way the children looked upon it.
Yeah. This bit. Yeah. That morning when I arrived at school, most of my Form 4 class surrounded me as I entered the gates of St. Jago's School, stunned to see me dressed up to the nines. You see, the fact is that I hardly ever wear a suit.
I was surprised to see you in a tie
suit
today.
Today's an exception, I'm wearing a tie, but I hardly ever do. I like to go casual, it's my personality. Anyway, when they saw me walk in dressed in a suit and tie, they kept pressing me with questions as to why I was so markedly turned out. Did that mean I was usually drably dressed? It made me think, was I going to a wedding? Whose wedding? And so they went on and on. I simply laughed and thought to myself, you'll find soon enough, you ruffians. At 10:10, I left my class in the hands of the headmaster, Mr. Joe Romero, or Pepe Romero, who wished me luck and bade me be back as soon as possible, since that morning we were rather short of staff. Well, they too would have to wait a bit for my return, wouldn't they? I arrived outside the court at 10:15. Already there was a loyal throng outside on Main Street side with placards, and they were busy distributing leaflets to passers-by. We had prepared those leaflets the night before, both in English and Spanish, and they carried the following message. Conscript or convict? Humbert Hernandez, who has been a conscript on previous occasions, has now convinced himself of the futility and uselessness of compulsory military service. Furthermore, he now finds that in conscience he cannot and will not do his military service. His brave stand on this issue has not arisen from any contempt of the law, but from a recognition and acceptance of something that in his mind is above the law, his conscience. AGAC, that was our action group, which is fighting for the abolition of conscription, supports the moral stand taken by Humbert against conscription. AGAC also hopes that the people of Gibraltar will, in the same way as Humbert, convince themselves of the outdatedness and the unnecessary existence of conscription, and will actively campaign with a view to repealing these very laws that have brought Humbert into conflict with his conscience. The law has to be changed. All these placards and leaflets were temporarily abandoned on the low wall by the railings as I was called into court. The crowd followed me in to take their places in the public gallery, which was filled to bursting point. At 10:30 a.m. sharp, the court rose as the stipendiary magistrate, Mr. J.E. Alcantara, walked in to take his seat, and the court was declared in session. The proceedings were opened by the prosecutor, Chief Inspector Joseph Morello, who read the charge that on the 20th day of July 1970, Humbert Hernandez, schoolteacher of 3 Willis's Road, being a soldier of the Gibraltar Regiment Reserve, did fail to appear at the time and place appointed for peace training without leave lawfully granted or sickness or other reasonable excuse, contrary to section 21, blah, 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 blah. Asked if I pleaded guilty or not guilty, I answered that the question was irrelevant. I would not plead anything. Under the instruction from the magistrate, a plea of not guilty was entered by the clerk of court.
Now, Alfred got off easy. Did you expect?
Well, he went at the end of October. He had his hearing at the end of October. And he got a £10 fine, which was already impressive in 1970. And we're talking 45 years ago. Nearly half a century. £10 fine, 3 months in which to pay, or a week in prison. Now, when I went, I expected more or less the same thing. What I got was a £25 fine, which was very hefty. I had to pay it forthwith, there and then, or a month in prison. That was it. So it wasn't just my perception, but there were other people there who thought that it was very harsh.
Well, they obviously made an example of you.
Well, that's what the magistrate said in his summing up, that he had tried to be lenient in the case of Alfred Cortes, but seeing that I was defying the law and he had expected a quid pro quo for having been lenient, I left him no room for manoeuvre, and therefore he saw himself having to apply the full weight of the law. In other words, he said, I have to work to rule. You as a teacher should know that. If I can clarify that, the 1970s there was a lot of turmoil among the teaching profession. The comprehensive system was coming in. We didn't have parity in those days. We had to negotiate our own wages. There was a great deal of turmoil among the teaching profession at the time, and we had gone work to rule and on a partial strike, etc. So he made a dig there, and that was it.
Were you involved with all that as well?
Sorry?
Were you involved with all that as well?
I was involved
happening?
in all that, yes. I've always been a union
I know
member.
Bernard Linares was with you as well, and he helped you at some point. Well, there were a number of characters who helped you get through that period in prison, and Bernard was one of them.
Well, Bernard was at the time, he was a priest, and he was a YCW chaplain. I belonged to the YCW, and we were involved in a lot of social unrest at the time. The YCW, we were promoters and initiators in many areas, in the dockyard and in the Transport and General Union, which had transformed, and so on. You know, I was involved. I was an activist in those years. Well, if you're not an activist when you're 20, when are you going to be an activist at my age? I mean,
let's move back to the prison and the support that you received.
Massive. I mean, from people like Bernard Linares, obviously, but from the teaching profession, the GTA was right behind me. From my drama group, from the young Christian workers, from all the youth leaders. I mean, yes, there was massive support. I mean, it was a very emotional time, Christmas time, to have to spend it in jail. So, I mean, we played on that as well.
What about your friends singing to you every single night?
Sorry?
Your friends singing to you every single night.
Well, I had never expected that, really. My first night in isolation, I was just lying there, feeling very sorry for myself, I must say. And all of a sudden I started hearing Kumbaya and We Shall Overcome and Humbert, We're With You, etc., etc. And they kept that up for a whole month, you know, come rain and shine. And December was a cold month that year, remember, rather rainy as well, but they always turned up, always.
You mentioned before that your thoughts whilst you were in prison, especially in that first week, were with your parents as well. Your parents were a great support for you.
Yeah.
Your mother visited in prison, but your father didn't.
No, I specifically asked for my dad not to go to prison. He was not well at the time. He suffered from asthma, bronchitis and all that, and I'm sure he would have had a rough passage seeing me up there.
It must have been hard for them to accept what you've done and that you were there.
I suppose it was.
I mean, Christmas, as you've mentioned Christmas.
Yeah. Yes, well, I know that my father was very proud of me, but I have to explain that my father was more or less like I was in his youth. Very much to the left, I assure you. And of his 5 children, I was the only one that really went down that road. And he was very proud. My mother, well, like all mothers, she was very protective, and she tried ad infinitum to dissuade me, and but nothing doing. I mean, loads of people tried to dissuade me from going to prison, as I explained in the book, even Humbert Hernandez after the hearing. But I mean, once I take a course of action, that's it. I don't change my mind.
A man of conviction, of deep
Yeah.
conviction.
I'm afraid so.
Yeah, we know that. So what was life like then during that month in prison? Did you get to know your inmates? Did you get to know the officers?
Yes, there were 13 of us up there. 13. But it was the most boring time in my life, really. There was nothing to do. Absolutely nothing to do. In fact, the prison officers, when I asked them, well, why is there no jobs and nothing to do? They said, well, in the past what we've done, because many people have never visited the Moorish Castle prison, right? But it's on a slope. Everything is on a slope, right? And you go right to the very top to where the walls of the actual Moorish, the town of Humbert, right? And they said, well, what we've done in the past is give the convicts buckets of white paint, and they paint all the walls, all the patios, all the way down to the end, right? And when they come to the bottom, we get an ochre paint, and we start at the top, all the way down again. I said, well, how soul destroying, you know. So they had nothing to do. No books to read. That's another one, of course. I mean, after I'd done a week there, the superintendent came to me and said, I've got a lovely job for you, knowing that I was a teacher. I said, what's that? He said, come with me. So I went with him, and he took me to this little cubbyhole. It really was a cubbyhole, 3 by 2 meters, right? And there was a big table in the center. When you opened the door, all these shelves full of books, but they were all covered with brown paper. Right? So I said, what do you want me to do? He says, well, you see, we covered all the books with brown paper about 5 years ago. It's now time to recover them again. I said, well, what's the point of having a library if you cover all the books? How do you look for a book if it's covered? He said, well, we've got to protect. I said, fine, well, you need to protect the books. Who uses the library? He said, it hasn't been used for the last few years. Nobody wants to read. So I said, what do you want me to cover them for? So he was rather angry with me and threw me out. And that was the last job that they tried to give me. After that, there was nothing else. I mean, there was nothing.
How much did the experience change you as a person?
How much did it change me? I don't think it changed me much. I realized once I was in there, the resilience of human nature is quite surprising, really. You get used to everything. You get used to anything. And you put up with it, if you have to. No, I don't think it changed me essentially in any... It made me stronger inside. That, yes.
Over the years, I know that you've read books on prisons and inmates.
I'd read them before I went as well. Yeah? I'd read them about Alcatraz and about all these, San Quentin and all that. So when I went in, as I said, I was 24, with a great deal of trepidation, because I'd read in these big penitentiaries and prisons, old prisoners and convicts take advantage of young lads, and so do the prison officers. I didn't know what to expect, right? But I mean, nothing happened, so if it had, I would have raised hell. You can be sure of that.
Did it make you see the plight of other prisoners in a different way? Did it?
Yes. Most of the people there, said there were only 13. The other 12, there were only 2 local people up there, 2 local convicts, and they were there because they had smoked pot. This was a time when pot, marijuana, was coming into Gib, late 1960s, 70s, right? And they had been sentenced to 9 months for smoking pot. I thought it was terrible, really. Instead of going for the people who sold it, they went for the people who smoked it. It was all wrong. And then the rest of the convicts there were either sailors or servicemen serving in Gibraltar who had got drunk, taken a car and gone on a joyride. They'd been sentenced to a year and a half. And for them it was worse, because once they finished their sentence, they had to face some sort of disciplinary board in the Navy or wherever they belonged. But yes, I got to know everybody there. The atmosphere in that sense was good. I got to know the prison officers, who were very firm but very fair as well. And I think they were all on my side.
And when you left prison, over the years, has it made you read more things about people in prisons? Has it made you more aware of things that are going on?
Not really. No, I just put it behind me. Perhaps I shouldn't have, but I just put it behind me.
But yet you used whatever you got from that month in some of the characters that you were later to portray in the theatre. And we spoke about when you played Hamlet, Thomas Sir Becket as well, when you did Murder in the Cathedral in St. Michael's Cave.
Yes. I think that experience became a wellspring for me into which I could dip, right, and use a lot of the stuff that I got from there in my characters. In that sense, it helped me a great deal. Hamlet is an estranged young man, very much a loner, which is something which in prison you go through, you become a tremendous loner.
Do you feel today that you still did the right thing?
Oh, yes. I would do it all over again. I mean, there was no call for conscription in Gibraltar in 1970. It had been abolished in 1958 in the UK. So why did we have it here?
I'd like you to read your poem on the refugees.
Oh.
This is a poem that he's asked me that he wanted to recite to you tonight.
No, that comes about because we haven't gone into why I write.
Well, we'll come to that later. Let's do the poem first.
Do you want that first?
It's okay, we know each other quite well, you see, so.
It's called Refugee Death. Gently, gently floating like a limp rag doll, her little body knocked against the quayside, lapping death. Arms stretched out on her watery cross, blind eyes wide staring at the dark ocean floor and at the blackness of our stony hearts. She sacrificed her life, a wanderer seeking, ever seeking, a safe harbour, never finding. We watched, dumbstruck, as the body turned of its own accord. With unseen gaze, she accused each of us, cocooned in our iniquity, of not willing her alive.
What drove you to write that?
The refugee crisis that we're experiencing at the moment. I think we've all seen terrible, terrible images on television. Children, elderly people. I mean, I think it's terrible, really. And I was very indignant, and still am, at the sheer ineptitude of the European countries and the European Union of not facing up to it. Have they forgotten that there was a Second World War and people were shunted here and there and they had to move and etc.? I mean, has Spain forgotten that she had a civil war and thousands of people had to rush out and find sanctuary elsewhere? We seem to have forgotten completely. And this business of Hungary and now Croatia putting up barriers of barbed wire to keep them out. How can you keep people out who are desperate? or running away from death and misery.
Do you feel you have a need to write about these things?
Well, when I see these images on television, they haunt me for days, and until I get down to write something, really, it keeps haunting me, really. It keeps hounding me.
So where does Humbert the writer begin?
Well, I started writing many years ago. The only problem was that everything I wrote I tore up, because I didn't have any pretensions of wishing to print or have anything in print. It's only that in the 1980s, different people started reading bits of poems that I wrote, etc., and they said, keep them, they're quite good, etc., and since then I started keeping them. Then when I retired, I had enough time on my hands to start writing stories about the patio culture in Gibraltar that is now gone, right? And I showed Cecil, and he seemed to think that they were worth printing, and I think that's where it all started.
Is it an escape valve for you?
Oh, yes. I go into a world of my own there, and nobody can disturb me. It's my wife all the time. But no, it's a world of my own, yeah. Yeah.
Similar
It's like acting, really. Why do I act, really? It's an evasive thing, isn't it? And at the same time, you're hiding behind a mask. You're interpreting a character. It's not you, but you can do anything, really. Because it's not you, it's somebody else.
Now, this book is a pretty dark book. I know there's a lot of humour in it, but there's a lot of dark humour in it. That is your side. That is what you write about. I mean, I know that you can be funny, and we have many good laughs, but essentially you're a pretty deep, intense person.
Yes, most people see a side of me which I suppose we all have a public persona, don't we? We present a face in public, but then when in the reclusion of our homes, I think we are maybe something different. I am a pretty serious person in that sense, more of a pessimist than an optimist when I look around and see what the world is like, and it's not something that I can help, really.
You chose to write about things that you knew about, you know about, like most writers, but they're about people, people that we can relate to, not just in Gibraltar, but also across in Spain as well.
Yeah. That's right, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about why you chose that style.
I suppose because these stories had been going round my mind for ages, really, but I never had time to write. I mean, while I was a teacher, I was a very committed teacher, and I never had time for anything else. I focused on that. Once that was over, I had all these reminiscences and memories from childhood and my young days, which I thought they should be put down in writing. There are things which not only did I live through, but some of them I overheard when I was very little. I overheard neighbors gossiping, etc., and incidents happening in the neighborhood which were hushed and kept swept under the carpet. And I found out that years later when I tapped my mother to tell me, and things like that. The patio culture has gone from Gibraltar completely. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just gone. But it is a phase of our history which I think needed to be put down.
Now, to me, you are the perfect example of bilingualism at work.
Oh.
Because both your books, except for Conscript or Convict, are written in Spanish. And your poetry in particular is pretty exceptional. And there are some very deep poems in here as well. But before I've chosen one for you for the end of the talk, but I know that you've chosen one as well that you want to write about. We're losing our bilingualism in Gibraltar.
I think so. Very much so. From certain years this way, I think it started when the frontier closed. I think we sort of had to take a good look at ourselves, and we started speaking a lot more English to our children. We do. But one thing I have found out is that whereas there are certain homes in Gibraltar, mainly working class, who used to speak mainly in Spanish all the time, there were homes in Gibraltar and families in Gibraltar that spoke to the children in English, right? And I had somebody tell me, well, I never learned Spanish till I was 7 because at home we only spoke in English. I was very taken aback. Because we're not talking about now, we're talking about 40, 50 years ago. That was not my experience at all. My mother was Spanish. My father was Gibraltarian, but he used to live in La Linea until the Civil War broke out. So my background, when I went to school, I was 5, and I didn't know a word of English at all. So, how can I say? It's not that I am more agile in one language than in another. I think I'm equally agile in both. But I am much more comfortable writing in Spanish.
The emotion?
I don't know what it is. It's like when you wear a pair of shoes, and then you get home and you get rid of those shoes and you slip on another old pair of shoes and feel, it's lovely. Well, that's how I feel with Spanish. I think it has to do with emotion, I suppose. And my first memories were always Spanish. So I hardly ever, I think, swear in English. I always swear in Spanish. It's much more round, and the vowels come much better. Anything to do with deep emotion, I think I'll express myself better in Spanish.
Now, you chose one of the poems from here to recite.
You chose.
Well, I chose one. You chose this one.
Oh. This one is called Compañera. Tu muerte es algo muy personal. Nace contigo amándote. Aprende a andar, a hablar y te acompaña al colegio. Es fiel compañera en tus juegos. Goza contigo dulcemente en tus primeros escarceos sexuales y te acaricia con ternura de madre cada vez que enfermas. Te apadrina en tu casamiento y observa con envidia todos los partos de tus hijos. Envejece a tu lado, estrechando tu cerco, haciéndose cada vez más íntima, más seductora, más amable. Luego, un buen día, suavemente, amorosamente, rompe el hilo de tu vida para morir junto a ti.
What do you think is going to happen if we do lose our bilingualism?
I don't know. I think it's a great shame when you have the opportunity of learning 2 languages, of losing one of them, right? And I don't just mean being able to get by in Spanish. There are loads of people who get by speaking in Spanish and speaking a mixture of English and Spanish, Arjanito or whatever have you. But if they had to stand up in public and express themselves with a rich vocabulary in Spanish, I don't think many people would be able to. And I think that is a great shame. I've argued this out with different people. Why is this happening? Well, mainly it happens because parents want it to happen. Naturally, they bring their children as they wish. But I think governments have a responsibility, and the Department of Education has certain responsibility. And teachers themselves, I think, also have a responsibility. Go round any school in Gibraltar today, and go round their library, and all the books are in English. Well, there you have it. And then again, when the 18 years I taught in St. Anne's Middle School, I think we were the only school that gave ample time to the teaching of Spanish. Most other middle schools paid lip service but hardly touched it. It's very heartening that, for example, this government is now introducing the teaching of Spanish in first schools. I think that's very good. Okay, but I think it needs a much greater push. It's something that successive governments, you can't say it belongs to one government or another, successive government going back right to the ASEAN have avoided that hot potato.
I know that in our...
It's a political thing, isn't it, with a hostile neighbour there. But I think one shouldn't mistake the political thing with the culture.
But in terms of language, and I know it's something that, well, you don't know, I'm going to bring this one up, but we've spoken about a lot in theatre circles, that it would be very difficult, and it is very difficult, not just to do a Lorca play today, but also to do a play by Shakespeare.
Oh, yes, yes.
Certainly. Because of the language.
Yeah, certainly. To do a Spanish play today, you'd have to do a comedy, a potboiler like Elia Cruz writes, right, kind of thing, which brings the masses in droves. But if you do something serious, most people accept that kind of potboiler rather than... I remember when I did La Casa de Bernarda Alba by Lorca in the Mac Hall. I think that was in the 60s. That was in the 60s, early 70s. And the audience response was not very good at all. At all. They expected a comedy, and what they found was a tragedy. And they weren't prepared to put up with it, right? I remember your father gave us a very clear review and explained why people in this day and age didn't care about that sort of theatre, Spanish theatre, which is a shame in a way.
What's your role in Llévame donde nací?
My role? Oh, I play a grandpa. I'm a grandfather at my age. What else can you expect? That's what I do, yeah.
Will you ever write a play?
I think I tried once, and I don't think I'm a playwright, really. No. And yet, I think the experience that I've had in the theatre pays off when I write a story, because I think I can handle dialogue in a very realistic way.
Okay, before I open up to questions, there's one more poem that you want to read that you've written recently.
Well, yeah. Well, this one, as I was explaining before, there are certain injustices which really get me, and as I say, they haunt me. And one other thing that keeps haunting me are these stonings that happen in the Islamic countries under the Sharia law. I find it so inhuman, so barbaric, that it just gets me, you know. And out of that, I mean, the last one was only last week, as far as I can see. And this one is called Lapidación, stoning. Caían, caían, caían las piedras, caían en aluvión mortífero sobre el montículo con negro hijab. Cerco concéntrico de no pecadores, de puros asesinos, lanzaba radiales de piedras letales a esa cabecita envuelta en inocencia, cubierta, cegada como la justicia, como la ciega fe, con tupido velo. Al aire desollador, los crepitantes gritos, puta, adúltera. Desde un cerro lejano una madre muerde dolor. Dolor que la abrasaba, que remordía sus entrañas adentelladas de pantera, y las piedras herían la trémula carne. Desenfrenada pasión de lobos callejeros, estridencia de la locura que quiebra la vida. Cuerpo adolescente, cándido e incólume, secuestrado, sepultado, sufriendo violenta muerte. Fue su propio padre, con aplastante roca, quien puso punto final al espantoso rito que aplacaba la ira del dios de la venganza.
We can talk for another hour, but I'm going to ask you if you have any questions for Humbert.
What was the reasoning for putting you in isolation for the first week? Was that the first week of anybody's sentence?
It was the norm at the time.
That was normal if your sentence was about a month. If it was under a month, you weren't kept in isolation. In fact, Alfred Cortes did a week sometime at the end of January. By then it was futile his going to prison. He knew it, because by then the select committee had already decided to abolish it. But he had to go. So when he went, it was for a week. He wasn't put in isolation at all. Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, yes.
Was it as a direct consequence of your action that it was abolished?
Sorry?
Was it as a direct consequence of your action that the conscription was abolished? Yeah.
Clearly, it was the imprisonment of Alfred Cortes and me that brought about the whole thing. It brought it to a head. Because, we made it very clear. We made it very clear that it wasn't just us two. There was a whole batch of young men behind us willing to go to prison. Now, the floodgates were open. And once somebody went, and I don't think, it would have been a very foolish government if they hadn't recommended abolishing it. It was then the integration with Britain Party.
Remember, it had been abolished years before in the UK. So.
12 years before, that's right, yeah.
Am I interrupting? One of the reasons why it was kept going is because there were these Gibraltarian so-called captains or lieutenants, and they wanted it, I know it sounds a very silly idea, but they loved dressing up and walking up and down Main Street, and it was kept for them. And I tell you something else about going for the 15 days, and that is, we were once being taught by one of these luminaries, and we said, now you're here, and there's a machine gun there, and there's a platoon here, and what are you going to do? You know what the hell you're going to do. And he said, well, when I say go, you all go straight to the machine gun. And somebody said, I can't remember if it was me or somebody else, he said, what about throwing a hand grenade? He said, oh, that's too expensive. And I really mean that. Another thing that also happened is that, give their due to teachers then, is because these camps were held during term time, and we knew there were about 10 or 12 of us who were going to be called. We actually asked them for us to go in summer so as not to affect the children, and they did that. Mind you, because we're all teachers, they always apologize before lecture. But basically, coming back to the same point, it was just to keep the silly people walking up and down, showing their leathers and so on. There was no other reason, really.
You have a question?
Can I just ask, in that month that you were there, you had no idea what progress would be made to abolish or not?
No.
And did it worry you coming out and possibly having lost a job, possibly being called back to do it again? What would you do then, and going back into prison again? How much did that bite you during that 1 month period?
By the time I went in, I wasn't too worried about losing my job, because, as I've explained in the book, the two Triai brothers were extremely generous with me, because they didn't know me from Adam. I'd never spoken to them.
But not in teaching?
Sorry?
Not in teaching?
No. And he, after the hearing, I don't know whether it was J.E. or J.J., the tall one anyway, came in and said, you're worried about your job? I said, well, yes, I am. I said, don't worry. If they fire you, I'll offer you a job, or I'll find you a job earning the same as you're earning now, and it won't be a teaching job. But, that from a stranger, it really bowled me over, from those. And after my first week in isolation, the short one came in, right? And I never asked him to come in, but I was called down to the visiting room, and he was there with another lawyer. And he said, so I said, what are you doing here? Why have you come? And he said, well, I wanted to know if you wanted to appeal, to have your sentence reduced, or whatever. I said, no way, no way. we'll see this through. He said, good man, that's what you've got to do. Things are going marvellously well for your group outside, so keep it up, keep it up. So I kept getting messages like that, and Bernard Linares as well. When I went into prison, he managed to wangle it with the bishop so that he got appointed chaplain to the prison there and then. So he used to come in 2 and 3 times a week to see how I was getting on. But he didn't just see me, he saw all the convicts as well. So those are 2 people to whom I'm very grateful. And of course, I've mentioned this publicly as well as your father. Because, I mean, he moved the whole thing and put it on a, I don't know what the term is, he brought it to the House of Parliament, and it was discussed, etc. But I thought he was, to be quite honest, I thought he was making political capital. I mean, politicians, you all do that. So I thought he was cashing in on the crest of a wave kind of thing. And that is what I've believed for so many years. But when I did the research for the book, and I had to dip into so many documents that I had never seen, right? And then I saw that 10 days into my imprisonment, he wrote to the chief minister, and he tried to get the chief minister to bring the matter up at Gibraltar Council with the governor, to get the governor to give me a reprieve so I could spend Christmas in jail. And Bob Police at the time just sort of brushed it aside. He didn't want that to have anything to do with it, and that made your father very irate. Wrote a second letter very strongly on the same terms, and nothing happened. They decided I should stay there. Well, fair enough. But the fact is that Bob Police asked him not to make this public. So here was another individual who did something of his own bat, on the quiet, nobody knew about it. But he saw the plight of another person who was down at the time and wanted to. So I was very grateful to him as well. I'm very sorry as well that I never had the chance to express it personally to him. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Anyone?
No?
Going.
Well, so when's your next book out then?
The next book will be out next November, I think. I was advised, because I brought these 3 out within the space of about 15 months, right? So, piano. We shall wait till next November. It's written, so it's just a question of putting it together.
Okay, well, Humbert, thank you very much.
Thank
It's been
you
a
all
pleasure.
very
Thank
much.
you all for coming.
Okay?
Are there any books?
See, there's a bookshop.
There are books, no?
Yeah.
There are books, so Humbert will sign if you want any books. Thank you. Thank you, I think it went all right.
Is that all right? Sí, ¿no?
Think so, no?
Muy bien.
Was that all right?
¿Qué? No,
Was
es
that-
cuando me levanto